Or like July. I think it's summertime, and then it gets past the 50s, and then
Yes, where's your stuff?
just a box.
You're gonna get stuck in
Who do
here.
we bring our complaints to?
Is anyone going down to the Ohio Clock corridor? Let's get you out now. Sorry, Reed. Let's get you. You're out. You're out. Let's go that way. Yeah. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me know.
Not a good day for my birthday. It's just like
It's almost pro-transparency, I think. Which is cool. I like that.
Part of the argument has been that the overclassification
It's part of why
there's too much to
there's too much to
protect,
manage.
so they can't protect it really.
Right, okay. But I like the 25-year maximum.
Some of them, because some of them came from the Senate. No. I mean, it's in, yeah, it's some of the insider protection and.
Good morning. Happy birthday. Good morning, everybody.
good morning.
Thank you for that response. Eric, did you say good morning? Somebody actually? Okay, somebody listening. Let me put these on so I can actually read. Thank you all for joining us. As chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I think I've known for years that our system for classifying, safeguarding, and declassifying national security information is hopelessly obsolete. And some of my colleagues have been working on this issue for a long time. We've got a Byzantine, bizarre, bureaucratic system that has not kept up with the times, has not moved at all to digitalization. So consequently, we continue to vastly overclassify huge amounts of information, while at the same time not fully protecting our nation's most important secrets. We, matter of fact, so overclassify that our military has said that that level of overclassification leads to a hindrance of working smoothly with our allies around the world. And because we've got so many records that are viewed as classified, and I don't want to give away any national secrets here, but sometimes records that and information that I can read in all of your periodicals on almost a daily basis, that with that much overclassification, that has also led to a simultaneous effort to actually require more people to get clearances. Truth is, we're now over 4 million people in America with security clearances. And that combination of overclassification and then too many people having clearances has led us to this problem. That effort undermines the public's trust in our intelligence agencies, why so many Americans think that the CIA may be actually hiding the whereabouts of Bigfoot, or that the fact that the moon landing was faked, or that 9/11 was somehow that was backed by the U.S. government. Truth is, we all as members of the Intelligence Committee know that Americans have to have confidence that when their government has a piece of information that there's classified, that there's a good reason behind it. So we, again, Senator Wyden and Senator Moran have been working on this even longer, I think, although Senator Cornyn has been on it as well. I'm a bit of the new guy here on this. But we've been talking about this literally for years. I equate this a little bit to some of the efforts that all four of us have been involved in as well on security clearance reform, an issue that was put off until we were literally 750,000 people behind on security clearances and not getting good people into the IC or into the DOD. We've whittled that down, but it's been a multi-year process. We're now, the same thing has been happening with security, or with classification and declassification. So now we're finally putting some legislation out. The first bill we've got will ensure that information may only take on a classification level if there is a balance test that says that the need to classify outweighs the public interest's right to know. Second, the legislation will ensure a maximum 25-year period for classifying documents and only would allow agency heads or the President of the United States to extend classification beyond that period. Third, and this is a little edgy, creates financial incentives that effectively tax agencies based on how many records they classify, and then use those proceeds to actually advance technology solutions for declassification. One of the things that we recognize is there's nobody in charge of classification. Now it's done all across the agency levels, across the IC, DOD, and other entities. So we designate the Director of National Intelligence as the point person to lead a whole of government reform of the classification system. Next, we will also require minimum standards for insider threat programs. We've seen the failure of those insider threat programs with the recent incident of Airman Shashera, so that by having insider threat programs in place, it would point out where somebody is overclassifying or walking out the door with classified documents. And finally, and a lot of this effort started when we were looking at the challenges with the Trump, Biden, and Pence documents. Finally, we will require a security review of presidential and vice presidential records in order to ensure that records being classified are not marked improperly, and that there is a process in place before presidents and vice presidents take those documents as they leave office. We're actually introducing a pair of bills today. I've just laid out some of the provisions from the Classification Reform Act of 2023, and now I'm going to turn the podium over to my friend Senator Cornyn, who will talk more about the other bill, the Sensible Classification Act. John?
Well, as Senator Warner mentioned, the thing that has brought a lot of this to light was the incidents with the Trump, Pence, and Biden documents being removed from a secure setting, and I think really what that raised or reminded me of my first impression in being briefed in a classified setting about some of the documents that we'd be given. I'd come out of the meetings and I'd say, well, I could learn that much watching TV or reading the major newspapers. It's not really secret. There are things that are very, very secret and are very important to be classified. Sources of the information and the methods by which it is obtained. Those are really the crown jewels of the intelligence community. And so it's natural that people would feel fairly lackadaisical about protecting documents if they felt like, well, this is something any reasonably informed person would be able to get access to outside of a classified setting. That's one reason why this is important. But the volume of documents and records being classified today has just exploded. If you go over to the National Archives, they can show you football fields full of documents that are being stored there, and they simply don't have the capacity to keep up with that. And now with digital records instead of physical records, those numbers have exploded. But I want to just mention a more fundamental reason why we need to review our classification and declassification process. Our democracy, our ability to govern ourselves, depends on the public getting access to information about what our government is doing and what government officials are doing. That's why I've been an advocate for reform of the Freedom of Information Act. Pat Leahy was my partner in a number of those reforms there to make sure that government produces information that the public has a right to know. And unfortunately, the all too human instinct to classify information which could potentially be embarrassing or jeopardizing to one's advancement in their career is just, like I said, a natural human instinct over and above just the need to classify national security information. And so, as Senator Warner said, there are 4 million people who have clearances, and 4 million people potentially have a right to get access to something. To me, it seems like it's hardly a secret. And I think it's really important that we look at our process and make sure that only those truly necessary bits of information are kept in a classified setting, and that otherwise that the public's right to know is supported, and that the political accountability that our democracy depends on is sort of returned to the process. So I think this is a very fundamental issue to me. Senator Wyden and Senator Moran have really sort of taken the lead on this in the past, and I'm delighted to work with both of them and Senator Warner, my chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, on this important process. This is important to our ability to govern ourselves, to the public's right to know, but also to protect our most important secrets from our adversaries around the world who would like to use this to our detriment. Let me turn it over to Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn, and to Chairman Warner and to you, Senator Cornyn, thank you both very much for essentially incorporating what Senator Moran and I have been toiling on
For a long time.
long time, and this is a exciting day because that work is being built into a broader effort, which I strongly support. Here's how all this plays out. Every single day, more and more classified records are created. They then build into a digital tsunami that basically overwhelms the declassification system. It costs billions and billions of dollars each year. The last estimate is $18 billion a year to operate this mess. Even after these records no longer meet the requirements for classification, they just keep piling up and never see the light of day. Sometimes the agencies can't find the records. Sometimes they are hampered by the fact that the systems don't talk to each other. So get this, the result is in 2023, documents actually have to be printed out and walked around town to get everybody's sign off before they're declassified. So we're not even in the right century with respect to technology on these kind of crucial issues. The four of us believe this is a fixable problem. You got to invest, obviously, in technological modernization, and having somebody in this whole labyrinth of agencies has to make sure these changes get made across the federal government. Senator Moran and I, and we've been talking to our colleagues, think that the Director of National Intelligence is that person to head this up. They've got the expertise, they've got a coordinating function, and the reason why it's so important, and you probably heard me ask a question to Director Haynes at our open hearing, is not all of these agencies are happy to have the kinds of changes that we think are necessary for the public. They're not bad people. They just have been doing things a certain way, and sometimes change doesn't go over too well. But the system is getting worse and worse, and it's undermining national security. The day that Director Haynes wrote Senator Moran and I was a flagship day, because before that, everybody says, oh, there's that Ron Wyden guy. He's a privacy hawk, and he's all concerned about classification. But I've been saying to our colleagues, the system is such a mess. Not only does it not serve the privacy rights of Americans, it doesn't serve our national security. And I'm really glad that the four of us have come together. 2 points about the bills, and I'll wrap up. They help strengthen oversight of classification and declassification by using entities like the Public Interest Declassification Board. And second, in addition to modernizing the technology, it's critical that the rules that determine what gets classified and declassified be updated. They really are just decades behind. The last point I'm going to make is a number of you have been asking us how the mishandling of the presidential and vice presidential documents and or these leaks affect what it is we're trying to do. So I want to be very blunt about it. My view is the protection of sources and methods and declassification reform go hand in hand. That's because it's a lot easier to protect important secrets when you're not acting like everything is a secret. So dealing with the overclassification problem is important. And second, there are technical solutions for ensuring that records are eventually declassified. One of them is called tagging records that may also apply to who is to tracking who is accessing those records. So these are fixable problems. We can protect what are called sources and methods, and we can better protect the American people who, as Senator Warner appropriately talked about, there's a lot of distrust about the way these practices actually affect people in the real world, and we're starting to change that. Senator Moran has been a terrific partner in this effort. I remember calling him the first time, and he goes, oh my goodness, what is he going to try and persuade me about now? But we've come together, and my mother after a basketball game would always say, make sure, dear, you're running with the right crowd tonight. I'm running with the right crowd with these three. Senator Moran.
Thank you, Senator Wyden and Senator Cornyn, Senator Warner. I'm pleased to join with these three. It is true that Senator Wyden brought an idea to me, and only because he was born in Kansas did I give him the benefit of the doubt and agreed to team up with him. The reality is we are overclassifying way too much information. We are under declassifying information that perhaps should not have been classified in the first place, and even if it should, now no longer is a national secret worthy of all the protections that classification would provide. And it's pleasing to me that particularly at this point in time, after several years of effort on this topic, at a time in which our national security is so challenged, and the issues we face around the globe, we are moving this Congress and this administration in a direction of the right-sized balance between what should be classified, what is classified, and what should be declassified. It's an expensive system that we have. It's outdated. We're a better country than what this system allows us to be. The people's right to know is still important in a democracy. All the reasons that this makes sense, but I would add that in today's environment, it is too great of a risk to have a circumstance in which so much information is classified that we fail to do the job of protecting the information that should be classified. And we've seen it too many times, and we've seen it most recently within the last month. And the consequences to our country, its citizens' well-being, freedom and liberty for Americans, and the relationship with our allies is all hindered by this system that so desperately needs to be overhauled. And in this current circumstance, I don't think the four of us are here in any way that we are suggesting we have a messaging bill, and that our goal was to get press from you this morning so we could show our constituents that we're doing something or appearing to do something. This is a piece of legislation that can become law and is desperately needed for that to happen. So I thank my colleagues, and we'll roll up our sleeves and see that these bills become law. Thank you.
Questions? Please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Can you tell us about the security review for presidential and vice presidential records? And Could a president, current or future, circumvent that review by just declassifying everything, given the presidential authority to declassify broadly?
I mean, we didn't go at the issue of an ability for the president to declassify all information. That is enshrined in law and is part of the process. What we did, this is pretty simple. It says if you're president or vice president, before you make that judgment of what is a personal record versus a presidential record, you have the archivist come in and do that review before the things get loaded into the boxes. I think, again, I'm not going to comment on the particulars of these 3 incidents that took place, but it appears there's, at the end of administration, there's a mad rush to get things boxed up, and not having a checkpoint there, not even, some people even suggested maybe having different colored paper. I think it's a relatively simple process of having that archivist come in, and then we'd also grant the ability for our archivist to go back and deal with former presidents and vice presidents if they want to make sure they've cleaned up their aspects. It wouldn't deal with the specific question about who gets to declassify what piece of information, right?
Well, you've been looking at all these documents, these tranches that the gang rates have had access to. How do you think that has helped you craft this legislation? How do you think those cases would have been different if these reforms had been in place?
Well, again, I'm not going to comment on the documents that we're one tranche away from finishing the project. I think it begs a question. I'm not going to, there are special prosecutors looking at motive and intent. But the notion that there was no checking process by the archivist so that becomes a formal step rather than a nice to do, I think is terribly important. I think it could have, if any of these individuals did not have an intent to take something inappropriate, this process we put in place would have solved that problem.
Senator Moran, in terms of the legislative path here, is the Intel Authorization Act the best way to get this done?
Well, this will be referred to HISGAC. We've kept them informed, but I think there are provisions that we are talking. I'm talking with Vice Chairman Rubio about. We got there are other members on the Intel Committee who are on these bills. It may take a variety of turns. And there are some things that we're doing in the legislation that I'm sure this administration, other administrations will push back. No administration wants to have Congress weighing in on this issue, and my colleagues know that. But this notion of a public interest test before you just default to classifying, the notion of some penalty for entities that overclassify, this notion of a time frame of 25 years and a requirement of declassification other than presidential or other agency head action. I think they're all steps in the right direction. It's been one of those problems, again, that we've all known about, but you've got these kind of bookends of the recent disclosure by this airman and the presidential documents that I think that's forced action. And I again want to commend all 3 of my colleagues have been active in this for a long, long time.
Senator, how would this exactly prevent the insider threats like what you just saw?
Well, it would make sure that there is an insider threat common standard across the communities. One of the things that I think I can say with pretty high assurance, and maybe this is because the NSA in its past has had its own problems, there are ways that you can make sure you monitor how many copies are being made. There are ways to better and make sure people are not walking off with documents. There are ways to make sure that even if you see a document, you only see a header but not the content. I think we need to make sure that insider threat best practices are maintained across all entities that have classified documents. But it goes to the very point that everybody's made. If you have, by default, virtually everything classified, that ability to keep that level of security high goes down.
The bottom line for your question is the day that Director Haynes sent that letter to Senator Moran and I said, what we're doing today, right now, is damaging to national security. That was the first time anyone in her position said something like that. And all of us began to talk and said, this is an opportunity now to build a broader kind of coalition with the kind of ideas that are included by the chairman and Senator Cornyn. I'm happy to support both of them. And we turned the corner the day the Director of National Intelligence said, for the first time, this mess is damaging our ability to safely secure our country.
Please.
Two questions. One, why two bills and not one? And also, do you have anything on how the House leadership feels about this?
I don't think we've got an indication yet from the House leadership. You know, we're pretty aggressive in one of the bills. I think we're more targeted in one of the other bills. I think it was a little bit just the legislative process. But I do think that this is a debate that's long overdue, and I think this legislation gives you combined legislation gives you a whole menu of options. John, do you want to?
Yeah, there's no real competition. We know we're going to have to work together in order to get this done, and we're committed to doing that. I just think it's just a case in one bill that there's one certain set of priorities and another in the other bill. But again, all of this is going to coalesce behind a piece of legislation that we think will get broad support. This is no messaging bill, as you heard. This is a substantial effort to try to reform the intelligence community and classification, declassification. You may recall back in 1997, the Moynihan Commission tried to do this, and I think their report was largely put on a shelf. And we are not going to be satisfied with that here. But we'll work with HISGAC, the Homeland Security Committee, Chairman Peters, and that committee. We now have, I think, 10 co-sponsors of the bill I'm introducing, the Sensible Classification Act. But in the end, I think we're all endorsing each other's product, and we'll link arms and work together.
I think actually we've actually taken some of the recommendations from the Moynihan Commission, which I think is important. Yes, ma'am.
Have you spoken with Biden administration officials or White House officials that this is something the president would want to sign?
Listen, they are very aware that this is coming. I indicate there'll be some parts of the IC that will have consternation, and again, we're being pretty aggressive here, but this is a debate whose time has come.
Two questions.
Go ahead. You wanna add
First,
something?
you referenced the fact that there's 4 million people that have access to various, have clearances, excuse me. It doesn't sound like there's anything in the bill that actually directly addresses that, so are you hoping that gets addressed by attrition if these other changes?
I think.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask about is that since the fix for the presidential, vice presidential record seems to be a sorting fix that the archivist can do, does that mean that that's the most egregious problem that you've identified in reviewing the documents, or just the one that Congress can fix?
I think, let me take them in reverse order. I think the archivist issue, I think it'd be very hard for anybody to say we shouldn't put that step in place before a president or vice president leaves office. This seemed to be a no-brainer. On the question of classification level, what we want to do is we say over 4 million people who've got some level of clearance, but as you know, then you've got another level of top secret, then you've got another level beyond that with top secret by compartments. So we're not trying to micromanage that, but if we start with a potentially smaller universe, those individuals who have the most highest classifications, that universe could be a bit smaller, and clearly the kind of craziness of a circumstance where an IT guy seems to have exposure to the most sensitive documents we have, to not have that insider threat component in place in a way that was meaningful is, I think, really significant. But what we want to do as well is we have been equally all working together on making sure that we don't mess up the reforms that have taken place on the security clearance process. When it used to be, we had 750,000 people on a backlog to get a security clearance, with security clearances that, for example, the CIA being more than 600 days. I mean, no young person's going to go join the CIA if they have to wait close to 2 years before they get clearance. So part of what we're trying to do with this effort is also work hand in glove with the security clearance that says, how do you make sure you don't just do a clearance review every 5 years the way it used to be, but we do what's called continuous vetting. and there's still obviously some kinks to work out.
If less information is classified because it is a genuine national security secret, you'll have less people need clearances, right? 4 million people, again, having some level of clearance. The ultimate protection is based on the need to know, and regardless of your security clearance. But 4 million just seems crazy, and if we can reduce the number of classified documents in a rational way that protects our national security, increase the public's access to information about what their government is doing on their behalf so people can be held accountable, there should be an opportunity to reduce the number of people that actually need those security clearances and address the backlog.
I think we're running into the back end of the vote, so we'll do a couple more quick ones.
Thank you. So you mentioned the 25-year maximum, but it's still subject to president agency heads. I'm wondering if you would consider like an absolute maximum, because as an example, as you mentioned, conspiracy theories thrive with lack of information. JFK assassination is a great example. 60 years ago, his nephew's going on TV claiming that the CIA killed him. There's still about 3,000 documents related to JFK that are declassified. It seems hard 60 years ago to justify sources and methods. So what do you think about an absolute maximum for an example like that?
I think there are some. I'm going to let Senator Wyden, I'm going to let Senator Moran and Senator Wyden answer that. Do you guys want to start?
Ron's already smiling.
Look, I'm not ready today to put a hard and fast rule out there. But the fact is there are so many of these practices that defy common sense. I mean, come back to the fact that in 2023, with all the technology we've got today, people are still traipsing around town getting everybody to sign stuff. So I'm going to work with my colleagues on this. I am trying not to laugh too much because they said, uh-oh, we know we've got an issue that we're going to have to deal with. But I think we're going to get into this, and there's going to have to be some common sense applied. And you just asked about an example of an area that defies common sense, and that's true with people traipsing around town today, taking documents when we have gazillions of dollars of money invested in technology, and we live on our phones from morning till night, and we got people walking around town. So we can't keep defying common sense.
It seems to me that we are almost to the point in which you should say there should be a definitive end of time in which something is classified. The problem is there's always somebody who has an example that, what about this? And I don't know what that example is. Nothing has convinced me. But in order to get a bill passed and get our colleagues to be supportive, let's take this step, and then let's figure out if there is something that would put an end to classification that is ad infinitum.
And let me just, one of these points that we're going to work through, I can very easily imagine things that even 25 years later, a source might still be in place. So putting a shot clock is a giant step forward. There's still going to be contention. I think we're down to last question, please.
Thanks, Senator. I'm curious how much you guys think this is a cybersecurity issue, and wondering if you've been floating this to U.S. allies, given that a lot of the documents that we've been talking about today cross over and have to do with allied nations. I mean, is the idea that this would improve cybersecurity posture in some way?
Listen. First of all, when I said we got a lot of information because of its classification level that we can't share with allies in the field, that candidly doesn't make a lot of sense. And so if you had a lower level of classification, you'd share with allies. A tighter system means you got more focus on your most essential secrets, and as Ron said, those sources and methods. So I think it will overall improve the state of protecting documents. I think we still have to be very vigilant on cyber. I think that is frankly, a separate lane. But the cybersecurity does touch the insider threat, because if you can limit the insider threat from things as basically as who gets access to information and who gets the ability to prevent copying or taking documents out, The ultimate insider threat is potentially opening up the aperture for cyber penetration. So there is a intersection, but there are different lanes. More to come. Thank you all very much, everybody.